Hello, my name's Jade and today I'm going to be tier ranking every classic book I've read. Except I'm also not, because I'm not including plays, because if we included plays we'd be here literally forever. For a little bit of background, I have an undergraduate in English literature and creative writing. I graduated from that in 2020, and I have a master's degree in creative writing, which I graduated from in 2021. I've read a good amount of classics, but more context, I actually read quite a few contemporary texts during both of my degrees. I did a myth and folktale module, which mostly was classics based. Drama through time, again probably mostly classics based. I'm starting to get it now. Shakespeare, a module on Shakespeare. I did a module on travel writing, on post-colonial work, module on transgressive writing. I did modern drama, exploring creativity. I forget, I forget, but that's just like a highlight of some of the modules I've done. In my masters I did the love story and I did historical fiction. Fairly eclectic range. Oh, I did the autobiography. That was another one I did during my undergrad at some point. Wow, it's all just a blur now. I used to know this so well. So for the most part, this is only books I read in their entirety, bar the Brothers Grimm, because I read a lot of them. Not all of them, because the edition I have is like the complete Brothers Grimm, I'm pretty sure, but most of them, so I'm gonna count that one. But the rest of these I've counted in their entirety. This is a list of both classics and modern classics, and I think there's a couple cult classics in here as well that I just assumed were classics, but then I was googling it and they're cult classics, and I don't understand. I thought they were classics, so I'm counting them. I have novels, novellas, a couple non-fiction. I'm gonna try not to mess around with my categories too much, because last time I really couldn't get them right. I think I've got them this time. The best, which is the best, these are the best ones in my opinion. We have really good, which again, they're really good. Appreciate but didn't love. I appreciate what they did for like our canon. I can see why people like them. I do objectively think they're well done and they're clever and they add stuff to our world. I'm glad they exist. Just didn't personally love it. Didn't personally connect with it. Good. Again, I liked these books. Just don't feel particularly strongly about them. And then we have Not For Me, which are the ones that just I don't really get. Didn't reap enough out of it to put it in any of the other categories. Which actually we're going to start with Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Controversial opinion time. I was really underwhelmed when I read Frankenstein. I really hoped I'd love it. Just thought it was quite dull. I didn't get it. My favourite part was the part with the monster, learning about his story, but the rest of it I just really truly couldn't care. It was a real slog for me to get through. I was only reading it for the sake of reading Frankenstein. So I think, in fact, I'm gonna put it in Not For Me, because I just don't think it was for me. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is the only Austen I have read. I read this during my masters. I do want to read more Austen. I wasn't obsessed with it. I enjoyed it. I did like it. I just wasn't obsessed with it. I don't really know where to put this actually, because I don't think it's really good. I don't think I feel strongly enough about it to put it there. But putting it in good feels rude. Maybe, I'll put it in really good for now. I think I give it like an 8 out of 10. It's a solid 4 stars for me. Let's move on. We have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I read these in very similar times. I read them both for the same module, the love story, and I was really intimidated by Jane Eyre. I really want to read it because I read Wuthering Heights during my A-levels, and so I wanted to get onto Jane Eyre. My teachers used to rave about it, but I was so intimidated because it was so big, and I struggled so much with Wuthering Heights, and I just had such a different experience with Jane Eyre. It is big. It is very slow. But I thought it was great. I listened to the audiobook. I think classics or non-fiction just work best for me with audiobooks. Both Pride and Prejudice and Jane Eyre were with audiobook, and I had a swell time. If I hadn't read them via audiobook, I do think I'd have a very different opinion of them, especially Pride and Prejudice. But I love Jane Eyre. I thought I was really entertained. I was really invested. I thought it was really well done. I just had a great time. I'm gonna put it in the best. I think it's probably not like upper the best. Well, maybe it is. I really loved it. I give it a 9 out of 10. I loved what it stood for. I loved that, if we look at it in the context of its time, how revolutionary it was and how unapologetic it was. Then we have Carmilla, which is our first cult classic. Apparently it's not technically a classic. Carmilla's gonna go in good. I liked Carmilla. It's more of a novella. It's very gothic. You can see the twist coming a mile off. It's very obvious what's happening, especially the way it's marketed, and I do think without that element it lacked its suspense, and it is is kind of a novel of suspense. The whole thing is like, what's going on here, and if you know what's going on, it does miss a little bit of something. I mean, I have heard the argument as well that like a really strong book, even if you know what's gonna happen, it won't matter, you should still enjoy it, you should still find stuff in there. But then like a novel of suspense, if it's all about the suspense, what else is there? I don't know. Next we have Nightwood by Junior Barnes. This is a modern classic. I read this for research for my dissertation a very long time ago now, it seems. I think I would have gotten on with this one better if I audiobooked it, to be honest. I remember the writing style was really dense and intense. That's my biggest memory. I remember finding the beginning very slow, but then when I kind of got into it, I did find it interesting. I remember there were like one or two characters that I loved with my whole heart, and like I was really rooting it for them and really reading it for them. I can't really remember much of what happens, to be honest. I'm gonna put it in good. I think I'm gonna put it upper end of good. I think the fact that I don't remember it very well is saying something, because there are other books I read before that time and I remember much better. There are books I read as a kid that I remember better than this one. Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell. This is our first non-fiction. It's a modern classic. I love this one. Again, I read it for the same research, for the same book that I'm writing, which also, like, does anyone know if Colette is a modern classic? Because I tried googling it and Google wasn't being very helpful. I have read some Colette, but I couldn't find any evidence to suggest that she was a modern classic, so I haven't included her in the list, but it feels kind of like sacrilege, to be honest. Anyway, Down and Out in Paris and London, I really enjoyed. I'm gonna put it in the best. It might end up getting bumped down. I feel like the best shouldn't be too big a tier. I just found it fascinating. I was completely engrossed. It's about George Orwell's time being poor in Paris and London. I learned so much and it was really entertaining. I listened to this one via audiobook and the audiobook was fantastic. And moving on, we have Animal Farm by George Orwell. I read this one a really long time ago, like I think when I was 18 maybe. I really don't remember it at all. I definitely need to reread it. I think I would have a way different opinion of it if I read it today. I'm gonna put it in appreciate but didn't love, because I know it mimics like the Russian Revolution politics and stuff, and I learned about the Russian Revolution politics and stuff during my A-levels, like in depth, but I didn't ever fully like figure out who was supposed to be who and what was going on, like how it actually represented the Russian politics. And so objectively I know it's very clever, but I just can't remember it, and I listened to it very quickly. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I think this one also has to go in I appreciate it, but I didn't love it. I think I'm going to put it above Animal Farm just because I don't remember Animal Farm. I'm sorry, by default you have to go at the bottom. I read The Great Gatsby, a research project that never then needed to be handed in. Like my school system kind of changed between GCSEs to A-level, so I didn't really need to read it, but I did do some research on it, and I remember like watching the John Green video on it on Crash Course, and so objectively I know it's clever. I think F. Scott Fitzgerald as a person is really interesting. I do definitely want to read more of his work. Again, this literally came out in 1925, so it is relevant to my research. Maybe I need to reread it because I read it so long ago, but I remember just thinking it was very dull. I didn't care very much. Maybe I need to reread it. Then we have John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, which I read for my GCSEs when I was like 16, 15, 14, however old. I've not read any other John Steinbeck. This is the only one I've read. I'm interested in The Grapes of Wrath, but I'm also terrified by it. This one's really nice and short though. So if you're looking for a classic and you don't know where to get in, Of Mice and Men, John Steinbeck. Perfect. Really interesting. I think the story's really great. I think it's a classic for a reason. The writing's really cool and crisp and accessible. It's really hard to fault. I can't fault it. I just don't feel strongly enough about it to put it in the best. Next up we have Francis Trollope's The Domesticated Manners of the Americans. Is that what it's called? Domestic Manners of the Americans by Francis Trollope. I know that her husband was a travel writer, and so then she wrote this one. I don't know if she wrote anything else. I read this for my travel writing class, and this is the only one in there that was a classic. It's an Oxford Classics edition, so therefore it must be a classic, right? Not only do I not remember this, but I think I actively like pushed it out of my mind. Talking about dance, and it is just like one of those things of like, this is just the way books were written at that time. I don't think it's like a problem of Trollope per se. I love the fact that she was a woman who wrote a travel fiction. From a history perspective, that was the most entertaining thing of this for me, like learning about America during this time period, like the history of it. But obviously it's not a history text, it is like a piece of travel fiction, and as a piece of travel fiction I'm not sure how much I loved it. So I pushed my way through it, but I don't yeah, I'm gonna put it below Frankenstein because Frankenstein's Frankenstein. My camera just cut me off and I have no idea, literally no idea where I was. The Well of Lonius, Radcliffe Hall. Written in the 20s, somewhat like memoir-ish, like based on real life. There's a character in there based off Natalie Barney, who was a very famous kind of socialite at the time. Stephen herself like is partially inspired by Radcliffe and her experience, I believe. It takes place partially in England, in the English like countryside in London, partially in Paris. I got so many like little tidbits of things and I learned so much like in that respect. I also just really enjoyed it. It is quite long, it's very slow, not a ton happens, it's very just kind of like meandering, finding its way. It's quite like a bleak book as well, but I was just like wholeheartedly invested in Stephen and their plight, and I just really enjoyed it. I listened to the audiobook and I really liked the audiobook. So it's gonna go in the best. Do I like this more? Do I like Jane Eyre more? Oh, my gut instinct is telling me that I like The Well of Lonius more. I feel like I like Jane Eyre more, like in that like I appreciate what it does sense. I'm gonna put The Well of Lonius above though, just because I think I had more personal enjoyment. Next up we have Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I read this. This is, I think, the first book I read for my master's. I very vividly remember reading it. I think I read it like in a day. That was my new tactic for my master's. I would just spend a whole day and I'd read the whole damn book and then it was done. I think this is the first in a trilogy. I never read the rest. It's very much about like colonialism in Africa, about like white men coming over and about colonizing these tribes. I feel like it's written from the perspective of the tribe leader. I don't remember it very well. I remember not having any like mega problems with it. It just wasn't the best thing I'd ever read. I wasn't overly invested. Like somewhat similar-ish to Pride and Prejudice, but I think I enjoyed Pride and Prejudice a little more. Really interesting perspective. Like I said, I'd read post-colonial books, so it was really interesting to get like a slightly earlier perspective on that. It's going in good. Basically, I'm gonna put it in the upper end of good. Yeah. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Now this again, controversial opinion. It's going at the top. I do really appreciate it. I understand why so many people love it. The writing there could be really beautiful, and it's a very like specific slice of life, and it was the first time that mental health was really discussed in this way, and I know it's based on a lot of Sylvia's own experiences. I really appreciate the fact that this book exists. And I didn't dislike it, I didn't not enjoy myself. I just had this big sense of like feeling underwhelmed and feeling like this book was overhyped, and I didn't get it. I was like, I'm not part of the club. I'm sorry, I really wish I was. But there was just something missing for me. There were no rainbows, no sparks, no fireworks. Even objectively, I know it's really good. I know I'm in the minority here. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I truly don't know. Let's move on to Wide Cigars of Sea by Jean Rhys, which I adored. I read this during my undergrad, but it was for an independent project. I compared it to The Yellow Wallpaper, toxic relationships basically, and I just had the best time doing it. I loved comparing it to The Yellow Wallpaper. This is going... I'm gonna put it at the top of the best. This, when I think of like my favourite classics, Wide Cigars of Sea is often the very first one to come out of my mouth and to like come to mind. Just had all the markers of a good book. It's not even, I couldn't like tell you specifically what it is about it. I can't remember if I give it a 9 or a 10 out of 10. I really like to reread it just so it's fresher in my mind. These kind of precarious, unstable relationships and these slowly like going crazy situations, I love them. Again, this one kind of has like post-colonial vibes to it as well. If you didn't know, it's kind of a prequel to Jane Eyre. Bertha in the attic in Jane Eyre, it's like her origin story. I just adored it. Next up we have the Brothers Grimm. How well do I remember them? Not very. I'm gonna put them at the end of really good. I feel like some of them probably I really liked, some of them I didn't like as much on the whole. I love Grimm retellings and kind of analysing them. Yeah, I mean there's so many stories that it's kind of hard to give one blanket opinion. I don't feel like a particularly strong attachment or a feeling to them, but I do think I probably on the whole really enjoyed them and appreciate them. Then we have Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This is another one I think I need to reread, but I'm so scared. Something about the books I read for my A-level just really traumatized me. I don't know if it's just because my A-level traumatized me because they were so intense, but like I want to go back and reread almost all of them, and yeah, I so stubbornly don't want to. I'm so scared. Wuthering Heights is very complicated. I did it like 1,000 times, so I think I got it down now. But I remember reading it for the first time and being like, why is she doing this to us? Both my teacher and Emily. I'm really grateful for the fact that I got to read it in a school setting, the fact that we got to read and discuss it together, like bit by bit, and really analyse it, because I really think like I got the most out of it. Like I wrung all of the little details out of it, and it made it much easier to understand what was happening, and I do really appreciate it. I think even at the time, objectively, I thought it was really good. I just really struggled reading it because it was so dense. I think if I were to reread it now, especially if I audiobooked, I would have a completely different opinion and a completely different appreciation. A lot of my appreciation for this one as well is how different and weird it was at the time, and it got so much hate, and I feel so defensive of it. Like, even Charlotte Bronte said really nasty things after her sister Emily had died, and I feel very strongly about that. I also think the fact that it's Emily's only work, like her only full-length novel that survives, kind of makes me appreciate it that little bit more, but I have very mixed memories of it because of how much I struggled reading it. I really think I need to reread it again. I'm gonna shove it here for now. I think it's definitely above Pride and Prejudice. Of Mice and Men's really good. I don't know if I can put it above Of Mice and Men. I probably could if I reread it, but from my experiences of reading both of them, Of Mice and Men is just such a cleaner and nicer experience. The Lonely Londoners by Sam Selden. I read this one for that post-colonial class. I really have very murky memories of it. I think even at the time, like, I liked it. I don't have any strong problems with it. It was interesting. It was really important and good to learn about perspective. But even at the time, I remember thinking, like, compared to some of the other post-colonial books I read in that class, I didn't like it as much as them. Yeah, I just don't have any, like, strong enough opinions. So I'm gonna put it in good. I'm gonna put it towards the end of good purely because I don't remember it. So I can't tell you. I feel like maybe it's harsh. Maybe I'll put it above Carmilla. I love Carmilla and everything it stands for, and the vibes are immaculate, and like I think modern retellings of Carmilla could be exquisite. I feel like objectively I probably like had less problems with The Lonely Londoner than I did Carmilla. Then we have A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This edition specifically does have like other short stories by him, and there's another novella in there that I can't remember off the top of my head. I didn't love them, so we're not going to talk about them. This is just about A Christmas Carol. We're pretending that I've not read the rest of them for the sake of giving A Christmas Carol a good ranking, because I had a blast reading A Christmas Carol. I listened to the audiobook and it was narrated by Hugh Grant. I think I got it on Audible, and that was just like a match made in heaven. I loved that. It was really enjoyable. It was really cute and fun and easy to read, so I'm going to pop it in there between Pride and Prejudice and the Brothers Grimm. We have The Odyssey by Homer. I read this one. This was one of the very first texts I read for my undergrad. I really was just like thrown into the deep end. But I had a blast. Again, the audiobook I listened to, I think this is like when I started cottoning on that like audiobooks are really the way to go. It was narrated by Ian McKellen, which was fantastic. Who else could narrate The Odyssey? Honestly. Do you really want to reread this one? Because I want to read I will remember her name, Emily Wilson. I want to read her version. I think I probably found it like a little, there were probably definitely like dips, like lulls in it for me, but on the whole I did really enjoy it. This is what made me brave enough to then start reading other like texts from antiquity and stuff, just like for fun. So I have a personal appreciation to it as well. So I think it's in really good. I'm just trying to figure out where I'm really good I want to put it. I think I'm gonna put it above Wuthering Heights, you know. Again, it's so hard to compare things to Of Mice and Men. I think Of Mice and Men is just on the cusp of being on the best tier. I just think it's not quite there. So I think Of Mice and Men is probably just gonna stay there. I really enjoyed it. If you are scared to get into ancient texts, I think plays honestly is the way to go because they're so short, and I think specifically Sophocles is like Oedipus Rex or Antigone. Either one of them makes more sense to start with Oedipus, I suppose. The Odyssey isn't as daunting as it seems. Like, it's long, but it's really entertaining. A Clockwork Orange, this is our other cult classic by Anthony Burgess. Don't know what to do with this one. It's a little bit on the complicated side in that it's got like a made up language in it, and so you have to figure it out for yourself. You do just get used to it. It's not that difficult to adapt to, I don't think. Kind of like reading a fantasy book, like it will just like, you pick it up, and the themes and the ideas behind this are so fascinating. I loved the discussions it opens up. God, is it irritating to read though. I do think about it fairly often because I think about the ideas it presents and like this whole idea of like what do we do with criminals. I think it's really important that this book exists. I think the topics it opens up is really fascinating. I think also like knowing why Anthony wrote it, if you don't know, I recommend looking into it because it is really interesting. Like imagine him with that perspective going into this. I can't remember how much I enjoyed it. I feel like I did enjoy it, but I didn't think it was like the best. I'm gonna put it in really good though, because I probably did enjoy it more than some of these. I think I'm gonna put it there. It's a tough experience. It's very intense. It's very violent. There's a lot of crime. Like all the crime you could probably think of is in there, I would imagine. And you're reading from like a really unlikable character's perspective, and just like that is really tough. That really wore me down. Then we have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. I listened to this one via audiobook as well. I will listen to it during October. Highly recommend. The vibes are perfect. The writing style is really great. It's a really interesting mystery. And it did, even though I knew what was happening, I didn't quite know how it happened. Like I'd never read the original story, but I knew what was going on. I was still enthralled. The Carmilla thing, like it worked here. Like even though I knew it was happening, I didn't care. I still had like a great time. My only gripe with it was the reveal itself, and it is very much like a product of its time. It just is the way that things were done, the way things were written. If it was written today, I think it'd be very different. I think it'd be much longer, and I do so wish it was longer. And that reveal, like that we could have like clued things together a bit more, because our characters were quite clueless. They didn't really know what was going on, and then everything was just revealed. This one big like info dump basically. And if it wasn't for that, it might even be in the best, but because of that, I can't do that. I'm gonna put it... God, do I like it more than Pride and Prejudice? This is like a difficult question to ask. I'm gonna say no, but I'm gonna say only just. This is such a weird thing to debate. They're so different. Because I think I enjoyed Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde more. I think objectively Pride and Prejudice is stronger. This is the problem I'm having, so I'm gonna leave it like that for now. The Counterfeiters by Andre... I always want to say like Gide? That's how my mind is pronounced. It might be Gide. This was recommended for me during my masters as research for my novel. Again, in that respect, it was very helpful. It was definitely on the denser side. I did find it entertaining. I am glad to have read it. I would read... I know The Vatican Cellars by him is also supposed to be really good, and was also recommended to me as research for my novel, and so that's on the list. I will read it someday, but it was a little bit dense, and I struggle with dense books in general, but if it's a classic, then just like extra struggle. It's a really interesting story. I don't remember it well enough to describe it to you right now. It feels quite literary and loose. Again, I feel like I had a similar experience with this than I had with another one that I mentioned earlier, that there were like a couple, like it might be Nightwood. There are a couple characters that I liked and rooted for, and they really pulled me through. I'm gonna put it in really good. I'm gonna put it towards the end of really good. Maybe it's appreciate but didn't love, but I think I enjoyed it, so I don't think it's quite on that level. I think objectively there's a lot of good stuff about it, and I did enjoy it and I did find it interesting. It's just not my favourite. The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. I loved The Colour Purple when I read it again for ages. This was my favourite classic before White Cigar Society surpassed it. I can't really fault it. I think it's really well written. I think it's really easy to read. I think it's such like a great snapshot of that time. It's a classic for a reason. I'm gonna put it... I think I have fonder memories of The Colour Purple than I do The Odyssey. Oh, I'm gonna put it there. I think I like The Odyssey a little bit more just because I love Greek myth and the story of the Odyssey, like objectively a little bit more. Iliad by Emily Wilson. Speaking of Greek myth, this is a recent... I read that one this year. Again, I feel like every time I put one in this tier, I just feel so bad. There were moments that were interesting. Really, all the fighting, whenever they were actually fighting, I just yawn. And I feel like it's so opposite of normally like the war council stuff. Like you would think that's the boring stuff, and the fighting's the exciting stuff. But it was so long. I just truly didn't care. For me, like all the politics with the gods and Agamemnon and Achilles, that was interesting. And the funny thing about this is I love an Iliad retelling. I truly do. Like the story of the Iliad and the Trojan War, objectively I love. Oh god, it was so dense, it was so long. I wanted to get it, I just didn't. This is not the cover of this book that I own, so I have to like refresh myself with what it's actually called. Second Class Citizen. This is another one I read for my post-colonial class. Adored it. Absolutely adored it. It was so well written. I was just completely again immersed the entire time. I flew through it. I was so invested in our main character. The experience of someone, I feel like she comes from Africa. It might be Nigeria. Her husband goes over first to England and then she goes over afterwards. I cannot stress enough how much I cared about this main character and how much I was rooting for her. It all felt so real. Yeah, really, really, really good. I think yeah. Then we have the Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. I read this during my historical fiction class. So it's interesting the fact that it's like historical fiction. It's like, when was this written then? Because it felt like, I just thought like, oh, it was published in 2007. This to me felt like it was written in the time period it was set. It was so dense. And I remember thinking it was really hard to like actually extract what was happening at times. When is it set? My gut instinct is to say like the 1700s. It's like set in Sicily and it's set in the spring of 1860. See, everything just feels so much older about this one. Fabrizio, the charismatic prince of Salina, still rules over thousands of acres and people, including his own numerous family, in mingled splendour and squalor. Then comes Garibaldi's landing in Sicily and the prince must decide whether to resist the forces of change or come to terms with them. So a lot objectively happens in that one. Well, you can imagine there's a lot that goes down like politically and stuff, but you're so rooted in this main character and his like day-to-day life and his like relationship with his family and stuff. I remember so vividly when we had the class on that one, the seminar on that one, everyone was like, yeah, not much really happened, it was kind of dull, and she was like, there was a whole like changing of the constitution, what do you mean nothing happened? But we just like, I think it's because it's like so dense, it's hard to extract all of that stuff. It is beautifully written. There are some scenes that are like blazed into my memory, like the descriptions of food was incredible. That's what I ended up using for like an essay where I'm talking about like how food is used in historical fiction. It's so hard. I listened to that one via audiobook as well, and even the audiobook was dense. It didn't help. But I think it's gonna have to go at the top of not for me. The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This one, I read it, I think when I was too young. I remember thinking that this one was really dense and difficult to get through. I read it like during my GCSE time. I'm gonna put it in appreciate but didn't love. If I reread it, maybe I'd feel differently about it. I'm gonna put it between Great Gatsby and The Wild Rose. The idea behind this is so interesting. There's been so many retellings and spin-offs, and I love when it's redone, so I do appreciate it. I think objectively if I reread it today maybe I'd have less problems with it, but when I read it I really struggled with it. Was the writing style, I just didn't get on with it at all. Oh, we have Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Again, like, it's really hard to compare Lolita to Jane Eyre. Which one do I like more? I'm gonna put it above. I can't remember if I audiobooked it or if I read it. I feel like I might have read it, you know. The writing style of this one is gorgeous and it's so funny. And again, it's one of those stories that's done so much for our society. It can be retold and played around with so many times. Again, the ideas that come from this one, very similar to like A Clockwork Orange, I think, and Lord of the Flies. The theories and the psychology it provokes and the philosophy it provokes is so interesting and fascinating. I was completely immersed in it the whole time. I think it maybe lulled once or twice for me, but other than that, I really love Lolita. I think I have more personal fondness and like attachment to White Scarf of Sea and the Well of Loneliness, but it's a really strong one. Then we're on to Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. I've only read one novel from each of the Bronte sisters. I really want to read more from the Bronte sisters. I really think that's my little niche. I don't think Austen's for me. I kind of don't really think Dickens is probably for me either, off of the fact that I don't love dense books. But I feel like the Bronte sisters get me. I didn't love this one as much as I loved either Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre. I'm going to put it at the top of good. Maybe some of these things that are in the end of really good should just be at the top of good. Yeah, that feels about right, actually. That feels more fair. I think it's entertaining. It was well written. I wasn't overly invested. The topics it pulled out were interesting. I would say they're interesting, but I wouldn't go any further than that. Like, yeah. Good versus bad versus like what is goodness and what can we consider evil, and like how does religion play with that. Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I was pleasantly surprised. whoa, what happened? Absolutely not. I think I liked it more than Pride and Prejudice. I think I was more attached to these characters and what happened to them and invested in their story. When I think of Little Women though, I think of the film, like the newer film with Saoirse Ronan, the Greta Gerwig one. So it's hard to think back to when I read the book. I'm pretty sure I listened to the audiobook of this one as well. I think, again, that's the only way I would have read it because it's quite long. And it's a really sweet story. I did enjoy myself. I just didn't like it as much as I liked the books above it. I don't feel that strongly about it. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Maybe actually this one would be better in this one. But I'm going to put it in good for now. But Sir Gawain and the Green Knight I enjoyed. I think it's a fun story. I think it's one of the more accessible ones from this time. But I don't really think about it very much, if ever, to be honest. The reason it's in like good and not appreciate but didn't love, because like how much did it actually do for our literature canon stuff? Like how much do people actually like Arthur? Sure, but this isn't Arthur, this is Gawain. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Metamorphosis by Ovid. This is really difficult when you're comparing stuff from like such different time periods of such different calibers. It's so difficult. I think this might be in the best. This is the Stephanie MacArthur translation specifically. I have read this one twice. I read it originally during my degree and then I read it again because I wanted to read the Stephanie MacArthur version, and it was phenomenal. I think there were a few times where it was a little bit of a slog, where there were lulls, but it's so long, but it's so interesting. There's so many stories in there and it was so entertaining. Writing is so beautiful. So I'm gonna put it in the best, you know. Where in the best does it go? Let's put it I'm gonna put it here. I think it's hard because again it almost feels like a collection of short stories because it's very like episodic in that way, and there are some that I didn't like as much as others, but then there were so many that I just loved. For a book of this size that is like as complicated as it is, the fact that there were only as few lulls as there were, like I think it's more just the fact that it felt like a chore because I was like reading it like very regimented. But other than that, it was great. Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I read this during my A-levels. Again, traumatized. This one in particular, again, it was so dense. And I just so, you know, I didn't care. I did not care about Dorian and his whining. My God. I found it really slow. There's that horrendous chapter in the middle that I just cannot stand. When I think of this book, that's all I think of. I think it needed to be so much shorter. I think it needed to be a short story. I think it just was so prolonged. I'm gonna put it in not for me though, because I really during my A-levels I really did not like it. George Eliot's Silas Marner. This is my only George Eliot. I've yet to read Middlemarch. I feel like this is like very not well known, but it's so sweet. It's so stinking cute. I read this at the very beginning of my degree. It's about like this grumpy like man who's kind of outside the little village he lives in. I can't remember if it's a town or a village, but it's something small. And he takes in this girl, and then she starts to change him, and it's so sweet. It made me so happy. I'm gonna put it, it has Little Women vibes. And in fact, I think of Silas Marner more fondly than I think of Little Women. I think it made me happier. Very short, it's very easy to read. Highly recommend it. The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This is a novella. It's a ghost story. I'll give you that. It's about a governess who goes to look after these children and they start seeing ghosts, basically. Like, what's going on here? Creepy children seeing ghosts. Creepy, creepy, creepy. This was so creepy. I think this is the creepiest book I've ever read. It was really well written. It was really interesting. I'm struggling to compare the two again. They're very different. White Scarlet Sea and Turn of the Screw. I read them both so long ago in different circumstances. I'm gonna put it below White Scarlet Sea. I feel like I just need to reread them both. I feel like I talk the big talk about Turn of the Screw, and I could reread it again and have a very different experience. I feel like I enjoyed White Scarlet Sea more and have a stronger attachment to it, so I'm going to put that at the top. I'm going to remain that is my favourite classic. Lastly, we have The Catcher and the Rye. Yeah. Again, like, it's the whole unlikable narrator thing. It is interesting, his perspective, and again, it pokes these like philosophical, psychological questions. I'm really glad that exists. I think it kind of serves a similar purpose to that the Bell Jar does. I think this, like, it sets up this like angsty teenage character, and we have so much great art now inspired by probably Holden. But I didn't reap anything from it. It wasn't even that like I was so annoyed by it, like kind of like I was with A Clockwork Orange. It just was nothing. I just didn't get it. I feel good about this, to be honest. Probably from like Agnes Grey onwards, these ones could all be in the top of good. but like if you think about good and really good as being like one continuous thing anyway, does it really matter? I'm kind of surprised by what made it to the top, like White Cigars to See, Turn of the Screw, Well of Loneliness, Lolita, Jane Eyre. I definitely knew those were going to be in there. Metamorphosis, Down and Out in Paris and London, and Second Class Citizen surprised me. But I stand by this. I think if you want recommendations, mine are still like Of Mice and Men, Turn of the Screw. Silas Marner I think could also be a really good one. They're all relatively short, pretty digestible, relatively easy to read, but also interesting. They will give you something. I'd love to hear what your favourite classics are. What's your relationship with classics in general? That is all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Shade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!